Ocilla, Georgia, a quiet October night. A beloved teacher locks her door, charges her phone, and disappears as if swallowed by the darkness itself. No struggle in sight, her car is untouched, her purse and keys are gone, and in the yard, a single latex glove. For years, this small town whispered theories. Was it a jealous ex, a stranger passing through, or someone closer than anyone could have imagined? This is the story of Tara Grinstead, a woman whose disappearance became one of Georgia's most haunting mysteries. Before we go further, if stories like Tara's matter to you, if you believe her voice deserves to be heard, subscribe, because cold cases don't solve themselves. They need people who care enough to remember. But before we talk about how Tara vanished, you need to know who she was. Because this wasn't just another missing persons case. This was Tara. Have you ever known someone who seemed to bring light to every room they entered? Someone whose absence would leave a hole so deep an entire town would feel it. That was Tara Grinstead. Close your eyes and walk into her classroom at Irwin County High School on any given Tuesday morning. The desks are full, but no one's staring out the window, no one's passing notes. Tara's at the front of the room, bringing the Civil War to life like she was there herself. A student raises their hand. Then another. The bell rings, but half the class stays behind not because they have to, but because they want to. Because being around Miss Grinstead felt different. One brutal winter, a student showed up to school with nothing. Their house had burned down the night before. Everything gone. Tara didn't ask permission from anyone. She didn't form a committee. She just looked at that kid and said, "You're staying with me." And they did. That's who Tara was. But teaching wasn't where her story started. Years earlier, she'd stood on a pageant stage under blinding lights, wearing a crown and a smile that could stop traffic. Miss Tifton, 1999. The applause was deafening. But for Tara, that crown meant more than a title. It meant tuition. It meant a future. She turned those winnings into a college degree, then a master's, then the beginning of a doctorate. She had plans, big ones. She wanted to lead a school someday, to mentor teachers the way she mentored students, to build something lasting. In Ocilla, everyone knew Tara. At Friday night football games, at Sunday services, at the grocery store, her presence was woven into the fabric of that town. People didn't just respect her, they loved her. But love doesn't protect you from heartbreak. For 6 years, Tara had been with Marcus Harper. He was a local cop who'd left to join the Army Rangers, and when that relationship ended in the fall of 2005, it shattered her. Friends would see her at cookouts, smiling, laughing, trying, but they could tell. She wasn't over him. She wanted him back. So she tried to move forward. Started seeing other people. Went through the motions of moving on. But the weight of that loss, it never left her. And on the night of October 22nd, 2005, everything she was building, every dream she was chasing, every heart she'd ever touched, it all ended in a way no one saw coming. What happened in those final hours would haunt investigators for over a decade. And the truth? It was closer than anyone imagined. Let's go back to that night. The last night anyone saw Tara Grinstead alive. Saturday, October 22nd, 2005. For Tara, it started like any other weekend, normal, even joyful. She spent the afternoon doing what she loved, helping young women prepare for the Miss Sweet Potato pageant. Hair, makeup, poise, confidence. Tara had walked that stage herself. She knew what it took. And she poured everything into those girls, the way she poured everything into her students. That evening, she sat in the audience at the Fitzgerald Grand Theater, watching them shine under the lights. She clapped, she cheered, she beamed with pride. Around 7 o'clock she slipped out. The night was still young. She stopped briefly at a friend's house. Just a quick visit, small talk, laughter, nothing unusual, nothing that would make you think twice. By 8 o'clock, she was at another friend's backyard barbecue. The air smelled like charcoal and autumn. Music played softly in the background. People milled around with paper plates and cold drinks. Tara smiled. She chatted. She seemed fine. But those who knew her well, the ones who really paid attention, they saw something else. A distance in her eyes, a heaviness she couldn't quite shake. The breakup with Marcus was still fresh, still painful. And even though she was there, laughing with friends, part of her was somewhere else. At some point during the barbecue, her phone rang. She stepped away to take the call. Once, maybe twice. No one thought much of it at the time. Just Tara, handling whatever Tara handles. But later, much later, those phone calls would become questions investigators couldn't answer. Who was on the other end? What was said? Did someone know she'd be alone that night? Around 11 o'clock, Tara said her goodbyes. She got in her car and drove home, alone. The streets of Ocilla were quiet, dark, empty. She pulled into her driveway, grabbed her things, unlocked her front door, stepped inside. And then nothing. No one saw her after that. No one heard from her. It was as if the moment she crossed that threshold, she stepped out of existence. But she didn't just vanish into thin air. Something happened in that house, something violent, something that left behind just enough evidence to haunt investigators, but not enough to solve the case. Not yet. The broken lamp, the unplugged alarm clock, the blood on her bed, the latex glove in the yard. Tara didn't know it when she walked through that door, but she was walking into a nightmare. And by the time the sun rose on Sunday morning, her life as everyone knew it was over. Monday morning arrived. And Tara Grinstead didn't show up for work. In a town where everyone knows everyone, that single absence was enough. Her co-workers called police, and when officers finally stepped through that front door, the house looked normal at first glance. But the more they looked, the more wrong it became, and one detail, just one, would make them realize they weren't dealing with a disappearance. They were dealing with something far worse. The officers pushed open the front door, expecting answers. What they found instead were questions that would haunt them for years. The house was still, undisturbed, almost too perfect. One officer moved through the living room, eyes scanning for anything out of place. Nothing. He called out Tara's name. Silence. Another officer checked the kitchen. Her cell phone sat on the counter, still plugged into the charger. The screen was dark, waiting for a hand that would never pick it up again. They moved toward the bedroom. That's when the perfection started to crack. A lamp shattered on the floor beside the bed. Not tipped over. Smashed, like someone had swung it, or knocked it down in a struggle. One officer crouched low, peering under the bed frame. There, tangled in dust, was an alarm clock. Unplugged. The display blinked over and over, like it had been ripped from the wall in a hurry. He stood, his eyes drifting to the bathroom doorway. Something was on the floor. He stepped closer. It was her house phone, just lying there on the tile. Why would a phone be in the bathroom? Then he turned back toward the bed. And froze. The comforter was pulled back slightly, rumpled. And there, soaked into the fabric, was blood. Not a pool, not a massacre. Just enough to know someone had bled here. Just enough to know something terrible had happened. Outside, another officer was walking the perimeter of the house. His flashlight swept across the front yard, then stopped. There, half hidden in the grass near the driveway, was a latex glove. He bagged it, sent it to the lab. Days later, the results came back. Tara's DNA. And someone else's. A man. Unidentified. The officers regrouped in the driveway, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. Her car was still here unlocked, with $100 sitting on the seat. Her phone was charging inside. But her purse? Her keys? Gone. The front door had been locked when they arrived. No sign of forced entry. Whoever had been inside either had a key or Tara had let them in. By midday, the news had spread through Ocilla like wildfire. Teachers gathered in hushed circles at the high school. Neighbors stood on their porches, arms crossed, staring at Tara's house like it might suddenly offer an explanation. Someone had been in that home. Someone had hurt her. and then they'd made her disappear. But the more investigators studied the scene, the more it didn't make sense. If this was a robbery, why leave the cash? If it was random violence, why take her keys and purse? And if someone was trying to cover their tracks, why leave a glove with DNA in plain sight? Every clue pointed in a different direction. Every detail raised another question. Was this the work of a stranger who panicked and fled? Or was this someone who knew Tara? Someone who understood exactly how to make her vanish without a trace? One thing was certain. Tara Grinstead hadn't walked away from her life. She'd been taken from it. And whoever did this had left just enough behind to keep investigators guessing, but not enough to lead them to the truth. What followed was over a decade of dead ends, false leads, and a community that would never stop asking the same agonizing question: where is Tara Grinstead? Which clue would have grabbed your attention first? The latex glove? The missing keys? The blood on the bed? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I want to know what you think. What followed was over a decade of dead ends, false leads, and a community that would never stop asking the same agonizing question: where is Tara Grinstead? Weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and still nothing. Investigators worked the case relentlessly at first. They interviewed everyone who knew Tara, everyone who'd seen her that night, everyone who had even the slightest connection to her life. And two names kept surfacing, over and over again. Marcus Harper, her ex-boyfriend, the man she couldn't let go of. The man friends said she was desperate to win back. He was questioned, re-questioned, his alibi examined from every angle. But nothing stuck. He was never charged. Then there was Anthony Vickers, a former student, someone who'd been in Tara's orbit, someone whose name whispered through the investigation like a ghost. He, too, was scrutinized, interrogated, but again nothing concrete, no evidence, no confession, just suspicion hanging in the air like smoke. In Ocilla, the whispers never stopped. At the grocery store, at church, at Friday night football games, people talked. They theorized. They pointed fingers. Was it Marcus? Was it Anthony? Was it someone no one had even considered? Every resident became an armchair detective. Every conversation a potential clue. But theories without evidence are just noise. And the noise grew deafening. Imagine living for years in a town where everyone has a theory, but no one has the truth. Where every neighbor could be hiding something. Where Tara's face stared back at you from missing person flyers that yellowed and faded with time but never came down. Her family held vigils. They pleaded for answers. Her mother, Faye, aged under the weight of not knowing. Her sister, Anita, refused to give up hope. But hope, when stretched across a decade, starts to feel like torture. The case went cold. Investigators moved on to other crimes. The media coverage dried up. And Tara Grinstead became another name in a file cabinet. Another unsolved mystery. Until 2016, that's when a podcast called Up and Vanished launched. A journalist named Payne Lindsay decided to revisit Tara's case, to shine a light back into the darkness that had swallowed her. The response was explosive. Thousands of people who'd never heard of Tara Grinstead suddenly couldn't stop talking about her. Tips poured in, old leads were re-examined. The case, dormant for over a decade, roared back to life. And somewhere in that surge of renewed attention, someone got nervous. Because the truth? It had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. In 2017, a woman walked into the Georgia Bureau of Investigation with a confession that would shatter everything Ocilla thought it knew. Her boyfriend had told her something. Something he should have kept buried forever. What she revealed would lead investigators not to a stranger, not to an ex-boyfriend, not to some drifter passing through town, but to two men who had sat in Tara's classroom, two men who had looked her in the eye every single day, two men no one suspected. For 12 years, Ocilla lived in the shadow of Tara Grinstead's absence. The whispers had quieted, but the wound never closed. Then, one winter afternoon in 2017, that silence finally cracked. It didn't happen in a police station. It didn't begin with a detective or a warrant. It began in a living room. A young woman named Brooke Sheridan sat frozen on her couch, her boyfriend pacing the floor. His voice trembled not with sorrow, but with the unbearable weight of something he could no longer carry. What came out of his mouth would reopen every old wound in Ocilla. Bo Dukes. That was his name. A man who'd once sat in Tara Grinstead's classroom, just another face in a sea of high school desks. But what he told Brooke that day was not the memory of a teacher. It was a confession. He said his friend, Ryan Duke, his roommate, had killed Tara. That it wasn't planned, that it had happened suddenly. He said Ryan came to him in the dead of night, pale, shaking, covered in guilt, saying he'd done something horrible. And Bo admitted he helped clean it up. Brooke couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her stomach turned. The name Tara Grinstead wasn't just another missing woman on the news, it was that Tara, the teacher, the woman the whole state had mourned. For nights, Brooke wrestled with it. The man she loved had just confessed to hiding a body, to burning it, to living with that knowledge for over a decade. Sleep wouldn't come. The guilt pressed on her chest like a weight. And when she finally walked into the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, her voice shaking, she told them everything. What she shared shattered 12 years of silence. Investigators moved fast. They tracked down Bo, then Ryan. 2 arrests, weeks apart. February, March. It felt surreal after years of dead ends. The names that cracked the case weren't strangers or shadowy suspects. They were local boys who'd once called Tara Miss Grinstead. The community reeled. Teachers remembered their faces in class photos. Parents remembered them on the football field. No one could understand how the story had come full circle, how the people closest to her could be the ones tied to her end. The news spread like wildfire, burning through Ocilla's quiet streets. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Neighbors stood by fences, whispering. It wasn't just a case anymore, it was betrayal. The kind that made a small town lose its breath. And yet, even in the shock, something didn't fit. The story Bo told, the confession Ryan gave, it all sounded too neat, too practiced. Like a puzzle where the pieces clicked together, but the picture still looked wrong. Because when the courtroom doors finally opened, the truth that stepped inside didn't match the story everyone thought they knew. What unfolded next would twist the narrative once again, forcing a community and a jury to ask who was really telling the truth. Did this twist surprise you as much as it did the investigators? Share your thoughts below. The courtroom was silent, that kind of silence that hums, heavy and electric. Ryan Duke stood there, thin, pale, trembling slightly as he confessed. He spoke of a burglary gone wrong, of a night blurred by alcohol and guilt. His voice cracked when he said Tara's name, and for the first time in years, the room seemed to breathe again, as if the truth had finally taken its first, painful breath. He said he never meant to kill her, that he panicked, that the line between accident and nightmare blurred somewhere in the dark. Families clutched each other. Reporters scribbled furiously. And the town of Ocilla leaned forward, desperate for a closure that never seemed to come. But then, it all shifted. Ryan recanted, said the confession wasn't his truth, but someone else's version of it. He claimed he was high, confused, and coerced into saying words he barely remembered. Just when the town thought the nightmare had finally ended, Ryan's voice trembled again, this time, not with guilt, but with denial. He said he'd been high, coerced, that the real monster was someone else. And suddenly, the town's fragile relief turned to chaos. He named Bo Dukes. Bo, his friend, the charming, confident one. The name everyone knew but never imagined hearing in this context. Ryan said Bo was the one who took Tara's life, the one who destroyed her remains in a pecan orchard over 2 unholy days. The revelation ripped through the courtroom like a storm, gasps, tears, even shouts. Every truth the town thought it knew was suddenly ash. When Bo took the stand, he didn't deny being there, but his version painted Ryan as the killer, and himself as the accomplice who helped hide the evidence. His calmness unnerved everyone. No tears, no remorse, just cold details of fire and silence, of how two men stood under a Georgia sky while smoke from Tara's body drifted into the night air. Each testimony reopened old wounds. Tara's family sat through it all, their faces masks of endurance. The jurors watched with haunted eyes, torn between two conflicting stories that both sounded too monstrous to believe. When the verdicts finally came, the courtroom could barely hold its breath. Bo Duke's sentenced to 25 years in prison in 2019. Ryan Duke acquitted of murder in 2022, convicted only of concealing her death, 10 years. The gavel fell. But the sound didn't feel like justice, it felt like surrender. Some cried, others turned away. Tara's mother whispered something no one could hear. For many, the verdicts didn't end the story. They only deepened the ache, a reminder that in the search for truth, sometimes even justice feels hollow. Outside the courthouse, a storm was brewing, not of rain, but of whispers. Reporters wanted statements. Neighbors avoided each other's eyes. And as the sun dipped behind the pecan trees, one question lingered in the thick Georgia air. If two men knew what really happened that night, why did only one of them tell the truth? When the verdicts faded and the cameras disappeared, Ocilla was left to face itself. The horror hadn't come from outsiders, it had lived among them all along, and as the town tried to move forward, it learned that healing isn't the end of a tragedy, it's the echo that refuses to fade. When the verdicts were read and the courtroom emptied, Ocilla felt smaller, like the air itself had been drained of color. The same streets that once carried gossip now carried silence. People crossed to the other side rather than meet familiar eyes. It wasn't strangers who had done this, it was two young men everyone knew. Faces once seen at school events, church pews, grocery aisles. The betrayal sank deeper because it came from within. For Tara's family, closure came with splinters. Her mother spoke softly at the edge of a press crowd, her voice trembling as she said she could finally grieve, but it wasn't the kind of peace anyone had prayed for. Years of waiting had ended, yet the ending felt uneven, the truth too jagged to hold. The pecan orchard, once just part of the Georgia landscape, became something else entirely. Locals avoided it, though some still drove past slowly, whispering prayers or leaving flowers at its edge. It stood as both witness and warning, a place where innocence and horror intertwined, where truth had burned its way to the surface. Life in Ocilla moved on, but never the same way. Beauty pageants still crowned new winners, teachers still smiled in classrooms, but the warmth carried a shadow. Everyone carried a piece of Tara's story, even those who had never met her. In the end, it wasn't a mystery in the shadows. It was a truth buried in plain sight. Tara Grinstead's story doesn't end in a courtroom or beneath the Georgia soil. It lingers in the people who still whisper her name, in the lessons her case carved into the heart of a community that thought it knew itself. For years, Ocilla had been defined by its quiet charm, its neighborly warmth. But after Tara's disappearance, every shadow seemed sharper. The case reminded everyone that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it smiles back at you from across a familiar street. The tragedy forced the town to confront its silence, to ask how something so monstrous could hide behind everyday kindness. Investigators never gave up. Journalists, podcasters, and strangers far beyond Georgia refused to let her story fade. That persistence, relentless and human, became the very thing that broke the silence. It's a reminder that truth often surfaces not through miracles, but through people who simply refuse to stop looking. Yet, the cost of that truth was heavy. Tara's family endured years of grief that no verdict could erase. Her students, grown now, still speak of her with both pride and pain, a teacher who believed in them, a life cut short before its light could fully shine. The lessons reach beyond one town. They echo wherever small communities close ranks, where secrets fester because no one dares to question. Tara's story shows that silence can protect, but it can also destroy. The truth needs air, no matter how much it hurts to breathe it. In the end, this isn't just a story about crime. It's about endurance, the strength to keep seeking answers even when the world wants to look away. It's about the cost of justice, the fragility of trust, and the weight of memory that refuses to fade. She disappeared into the night, but her story didn't end there. Justice came, slow but relentless, and Tara Grinstead's light still burns in the hearts she touched. If you believe cold cases like Tara's deserve to be told and remembered, like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and ensures that no voice, no matter how faint, is ever forgotten. In the end, Tara's story is more than tragedy, it's a mirror held up to all of us. A reminder that truth may hide, but it never truly disappears. Long after the lights fade and the headlines move on, what remains are the ripples of courage, of love, of lives forever changed. And somewhere in that quiet Georgia town, Tara's memory still whispers, "Some stories refuse to die."